The internet is a chaotic cosmic cavern that reflects the worst of humanity. If you look to your left, there are furries. If you look to your right, you're forced to watch Austin McBroom have a post-divorce breakdown on Snapchat. His cringe is symptomatic of fumbling a bad bitch. I wouldn't know anything about that. But for all the ways the internet is unhinged, we still have rules here. We're not heathens. Rule number 1, never spend your time living in harmony. You must argue with the first stranger you see for at least 3 hours. It doesn't matter if you had prior engagements. It doesn't matter if your grandma is in hospice. Someone just called your favorite musician jobless and weird. It's your God-given right to waste time on the internet arguing about it. Get to it. Rule number 2, always interpret things in bad faith. Everything is evil and you are the only correct person alive. Now, open up a YouTube comment section and unload all of that insecurity and shame onto the first black femme you see. Rule number 3, never, ever become the main character. Ever. I don't care if you just found the cure to every malaise on planet Earth and everyone loves you. If you are put on a pedestal, your downfall will be greater than Icarus, especially if that pedestal is atop a dunce hat. This last rule applies especially to G.Rose Blanchard, honorary main character of January. A violent crime, a viral case, endless Instagram posts, and an audience waiting with bated breath. Today's topic asks of you, how would you feel if a formerly incarcerated person who served time for killing her mother became the internet's it girl for a few short weeks? Welcome to our first mini episode of Internet Infamy, a series on my channel where I, Shanspeare, your extremely online host, take you through archived addictions of the internet's past. The goal of this series is to dive deep into older topics. You should expect girth and you should expect the tea to be a little cold. But for many episodes, I've decided to go a different route. I want to cover burning topics that are relatively fresh, but still all-consuming on the internet. And I hope to do it briefly. That's where G.Rose Blanchard comes in, the topic of today's mini episode. Miss Blanchard's story first fell into our lap some awful day in 2015. It featured all the hallmarks of a viral true crime case: sex, drugs, and deception. There is so much information attached to this case that despite seeing 2 convictions and a highly sensationalized trial, there are still, to this day, conspiracy theories and mistrust among netizens. For clarity, this is not a true crime video. I am not a true crime creator. But for any of this to make sense, I unfortunately have to give you some backstory. And let me warn you, it's a little hard. Rod Blanchard was 17 years old when he found out that his girlfriend was pregnant. A horror story on its own, this detail was strained by the fact that his girlfriend, Dee Dee, was 24 years old, as in 24 adult years old. We literally just talked about this. He waited like the gentleman he is up until the very moment she was 18 years old to make a move on her. No, really. He waited until 12:01 a.m. on her birthday because bro was at her 18th birthday party helping her blow out the candles. Rod explains in various interviews that upon learning that Dee Dee was pregnant, he felt the need to do the right thing. This happens to be older generational slang for marrying someone you got pregnant. So after just 4 odd months of dating, Rod and Dee Dee tie the knot. It was, quite frankly, a match doomed from the start. On the morning of his 18th birthday, Rod rolled over in bed and he opened his eyes. His entire life splayed out in front of him like a film reel. Specifically, he began to analyze his marriage to Dee Dee. He wondered, had he truly done the quote-unquote right thing? Dee Dee was still pregnant at this time, just a few months away from delivery, but he had woken up that morning with an epiphany. This was not the life he anticipated. So he filed for divorce, and Dee Dee would become the primary guardian of their soon-to-be daughter, G.Rose, once she was born. Now, let's fast forward just a bit. According to her recent documentary, by the time G.Rose was 1 year old, she had already undergone one surgery and had been diagnosed with two things: sleep apnea and visual impairment. Witnesses state that Dee Dee was often fretful over her baby. She was constantly concerned about G.Rose's safety and health, which is honestly very normal behavior for a first-time mother. But as G.Rose got older, Dee Dee's family began to notice an unhealthy obsession she had with diagnosing and analyzing her daughter. One day, G.Rose had been riding on a motorcycle with her grandfather, who, Jesus Christ, we will circle back to later. But G.Rose and her grandfather got into a fender bender on this bike. In retrospect, G.Rose notes that she wasn't hurt by this accident. Maybe scraped up, maybe frazzled, but certainly not injured. And yet, soon after, her mother came home with a wheelchair, and she told G.Rose that G.Rose had to use it. According to G.Rose, she didn't fret it at first. It would be for a week or two max. But Dee Dee became more insistent over time. G.Rose was made to stay in her chair even though she knew that she didn't necessarily need it. So just to clarify, Dee Dee told everyone that G.Rose had muscular dystrophy, which causes weakness and a loss of muscle mass, which could in turn potentially inhibit a person's ability to walk. Also, I think this is a good time as any to clear up a common misconception that I've seen on the internet. So when it comes to mobility aids, everyone uses them differently based on their level of need. And just because someone is in a wheelchair one day and then walking the next does not mean they're faking their disability. It just means their needs are on a spectrum. So I don't want to imply anything with that last clip implying that people are faking if they don't always use a wheelchair. It's just that in G.Rose's case, she never had muscular dystrophy nor any other disability that would require the use of a mobility aid, but she was still required by her mother to use a wheelchair, and prior to that, a walker. So for some context, at the time, the Blanchards lived in Louisiana with their family, so there were often a lot of other kids and adults nearby. Whenever Dee Dee would step out for errands, G.Rose would be left with other family members, and she would go play with these other kids. They would jump on the trampoline and run around the yard, but one day, when Dee Dee returned, she was enraged. A family witness describes Dee Dee as arriving home and yanking G.Rose off the trampoline, saying that she was disabled and was not allowed to go outside or to leave her wheelchair. And as G.Rose aged, her medical list only grew. Dee Dee would go on to claim that G.Rose had a seizure disorder, hearing impairment, and cancer, which Dee Dee supplemented with routine head shavings. G.Rose even claims that her mom would put Orajel on her gums to make her mouth numb, which in turn would cause drooling, and that would prompt doctors to remove her salivary glands. Subsequently, G.Rose's teeth soon began to rot, which would later lead to her getting them entirely extracted. In her various documentaries and interviews, she also suggests that the medication her mother had her on for a litany of non-existent illnesses also contributed to the decay. Either way, G.Rose now has a partial denture and stainless steel crowns. Some reports on the internet note that she was left with 16 teeth out of the full adult set of 32. So Dee Dee also reportedly told doctors that G.Rose wasn't getting proper nutrients and was subsequently underweight. So to explain this, Dee said that G.Rose had an aversion to eating, and this is something that G.Rose has since denied. Doctors ended up placing a feeding tube into G.Rose's stomach because of this, which gave Dee full control of her daughter's diet and medication intake. It's important to note that most of these diagnoses, besides the sleep apnea and visual impairment, were not fully confirmed by doctors. Experts on the case consider G.Rose to be a victim of medical abuse, as her mom most likely had MSP. MSP is defined by a caretaker, usually a mother, creating or exaggerating symptoms of various illnesses. There's usually a properly identified and treated illness in the beginning, as shown by G.Rose's apparent sleep apnea and visual impairment. But a person living with MSP is said to begin fabricating or exaggerating other illnesses down the line. Mind you, I'm not an expert, I am just a YouTuber, and matters of mental health especially need to be discussed with care and nuance, and quite frankly, expertise. I'm just relaying what I've heard from G.Rose's advocacy, as well as what the internet says. Netizens often ask how Dee was able to fabricate these illnesses without medical professionals stepping in. And that's honestly a really tough thing to answer, because I don't think it's just one thing. Some of the doctors involved imply that they knew something was off, but they weren't sure, so they never got around to reporting it. Others claim that they did report Dee, but nothing ever came out of it. Dee was also medically knowledgeable, and she was able to articulate and therefore create evidence of these illnesses. There was also 2005's Hurricane Katrina, which caused massive tragedy and damage to Louisiana, where the Blanchards lived at the time. Dee told medical professionals that she had lost all of G.Rose's medical history and documentation to the hurricane, leaving new doctors to sort of perhaps take her at her word. Dee also allegedly dropped doctors if they hesitated or declined to enable her. All of this would create the rather perfect environment for Dee to medically abuse her daughter. And believe it or not, there's more. G.Rose alleges that when she was around 9 years old, her grandfather began to routinely molest her. He denies this in the most unbelievable and disgusting way possible. In the prison confessions of G.Rose Blanchard, her grandfather claims that it was not him, the adult, the grown adult, no less, who was abusing G.Rose, but it was G.Rose, this child in a wheelchair, who was coming on to him. And that is all I can say about that, because I will start imagining myself ripping his skull apart with my bare hands, and that is against YouTube guidelines. Everywhere G.Rose turned in her childhood, someone was taking advantage of her. Not only was she being medically abused by her mother and allegedly assaulted by her grandfather, but G.Rose has also come out to claim that Dee was emotionally and physically abusive as well. Despite the tumultuous relationship she had with her mother, G.Rose states that she still craved her mother's affection and approval, which, if you know anything about emotional abuse, baby girl, that is a very common, confusing state to exist in. G.Rose would do anything to be on her mother's good side. When she did something that her mom maybe didn't like or approve of, Dee would allegedly isolate G.Rose. She would show affection to everyone else, even the family cat, and kind of like side-eye her daughter in a way that said, "You are totally unlovable." And for a kid to experience this, let me tell you. Dee would also allegedly restrict G.Rose's access to food. She would allegedly hit her as punishment. And after one grand moment of defiance, Dee even allegedly chained G.Rose to the bed for 2 weeks. So, let me explain. G.Rose had begun to crave freedom. She had recently discovered that she was much older than what her mom was telling her and everyone in town. Her mom had told everyone that G.Rose was 15, when really she was 19. And this opened a whole new possible world for G.Rose. She wanted to live life like other people her age. For instance, her mother would take her to these local conventions, and at one in particular, she met a man. He had found her on Facebook afterwards, somehow, and they struck up a quick connection. According to G.Rose, she had told this guy bits and pieces of her story, such as her age, and he told her in return that she was an adult and that she could go anywhere she wanted. He had painted this grand romantic fairy tale, something that appealed to G.Rose. After all, this was her whole entire life. She had grew up enamored by Disney love stories. So, she devised a plan to run away with this random Facebook man, only for her to meet him and realize that she was still trapped. He didn't have his own place, and he didn't have a car. Not only that, but Dee Dee was hot on G.Rose's trail. She had found her daughter's location from family friends who I guess they had mutual friends, and they found out that G.Rose was with this man. So Dee Dee finds her and lures her back home. This is what led to G.Rose being allegedly chained to the bed for 2 weeks. Dee Dee also allegedly even connected herself to G.Rose via a dog leash. So if G.Rose so much as moved during the night, Dee Dee would be awoken by the tugging of a chain. In her recent Lifetime documentary, G.Rose claims that after growing up and being plied with copious medication and undergoing all of these surgeries, she had become addicted to painkillers. She used these as well as the internet to cope with her abusive environment. It was through this interesting concoction of disconnection that G.Rose met her next boyfriend, 23-year-old Nick Godejohn. At this time, G.Rose was 21 and had been talking to a neighbor who thought she was younger, by the way, who then suggested that G.Rose sign up for a dating website. This was before the Hinges and Tinders and Grinders of the world. That's child's play. No, this was the time of Plenty of Fish, FarmersOnly.com, and Black People Meet. This was the time of Christian Mingle. So, G.Rose and Nick hit it off immediately, but the honeymoon phase was riddled with endless red flags. An ex-girlfriend of Nick's allegedly reached out to G.Rose, trying to warn her about Nick's violent past. Not only did Nick have a criminal record, but his ex-girlfriend also accused him of being abusive. This was water under the bridge for G.Rose though. According to her, she wanted to love someone and be loved in return so badly that she was willing to ignore potential danger. However, some people on Reddit, as if they have merit, argue that Nick's violence played exactly into G.Rose's plan. In her documentary, she explains that around the time she began to meet Nick, she had also began exploring her options when it came to emancipating herself from her mother. She doesn't explain what these options are, just that she was considering their possibility. G.Rose stated that she felt trapped. This feeling was especially exacerbated when, before meeting Nick, G.Rose had attempted to run away for a second time. She had packed a to-go bag and hid it under the couch, only for Dee Dee to allegedly find it. This culminated in G.Rose firing a BB gun at her mother in what she claims as self-defense. Interestingly, G.Rose didn't know that this was a BB gun. She had pulled the trigger as many times as she could and looked up to find the wounds were superficial. There's evidence to back this story up, evidence that confirms Dee Dee was at least shot anyway, because she filed a report stating that she and G.Rose had been mugged in a Walmart parking lot. G.Rose and Nick's relationship was probably just as doomed as her last. He lived in an entirely different state than her, and she wasn't even allowed to have a boyfriend. But they figured they could arrange some sort of meet cute that would make her mother more open to the idea. So, in March of 2015, G.Rose and Nick planned to incidentally meet in front of her mom. G.Rose was 24 now, and Nick was 26. Their idea was, if Dee Dee could just see G.Rose meet someone organically in a controlled environment, then maybe she would be open to her daughter having a partner. But it didn't go down that way. Dee Dee found Nick kind of creepy. In her mind, she was going to the movies to see Cinderella with her daughter, who, for all intents and purposes, looked rather young. And this grown man with no kids or partner kept hovering next to them. But G.Rose and Nick were enamored with one another during this meeting. Nick stepped out of the theater to go use the bathroom, and G.Rose told her mom something similar and followed after him not long after. Finally alone, hidden in a bathroom stall, I'm not sure what they did. There's two different explanations of what happened that day, and you could argue that it boils down to semantics. In one version, G.Rose claims to have lost her virginity to Nick. In another, she claims that they tried, but Nick couldn't perform, and so they just said that it happened. Regardless, something happens in that bathroom stall, and G.Rose leaves it, goes home with her mother after the movie. Dee Dee is pissed, according to G.Rose. Pissed because she felt that G.Rose was being promiscuous at the theater. So G.Rose gets online after this fight and tells Nick that their plan did not work. Dee Dee did not like him, and their remaining option fell into place. In all actuality, G.Rose and Nick had been planning a violent crime for at least a year. During the 3 months between Nick's first visit and his return to the Blanchard residence, their ideas became cemented. They picked a weapon. G.Rose filmed informational videos for Nick that showed the layout of her house. And Nick even proposed a horrible addition to their plan. He allegedly wanted to sexually assault his victim after the crime. G.Rose claims that she found his proposal weird and disgusting, because it is, and stated that she broke up with him because of it. But shortly after, they reconciled and the plan was back on. They were going to kill Dee Dee Blanchard. Whether it be on the stand or on camera, G.Rose has maintained that this crime was her idea. She stated that she didn't think that she could be free while her mother was still alive. It was either Dee Dee or her. At Nick's trial in 2018, G.Rose also stated that she was ready to go forth with a second plan, if Nick was willing. Either they harm Dee Dee, or Nick gets G.Rose pregnant. Neither seems very solution-based, but Nick never gave her an answer, so they went forward with the original plan. On that awful night of June 9th, Nick went to the Blanchard home. He carried out the crime while G.Rose waited in the bathroom, and then they fled the scene. G.Rose had written on the family Facebook page that Dee Dee was dead, and that someone had assaulted and kidnapped her daughter, G.Rose. Interestingly enough, this family Facebook page is still up and the status is still visible. You can see neighbors and friends transition from confusion to concern to astonishment as they realize the truth of what happened. Obviously, police were able to trace that IP status and found G.Rose and Nick nearly 600 miles away in Wisconsin, where Nick lived with his parents. Both of them were taken into custody. This arrest rocked the nation. Previously, the media had been reporting that G.Rose, who was assumed to be using a wheelchair and in need of a litany of medication, was kidnapped and probably deceased. But upon being arrested, they were presented with an admittedly undernourished young woman who walked unassisted. The scope of Dee Dee's abuse soon came to light, and this changed how G.Rose was perceived, not only by the public, but also by the prosecution. Nick was harder to sympathize with in the eyes of the state. The defense argued that Nick had an IQ of 82 and that he is on the autism spectrum. This, in their eyes, made him more susceptible to manipulation. Other camps, however, argued that Nick was not the one being abused and so had more options than G.Rose, making his actions less understandable. That, coupled with his criminal record and fantasies of assault, Nick was charged with and convicted of capital murder. He received life in prison for his involvement in the crime. G.Rose was given a plea deal of second-degree murder due to the extensiveness of her abuse, and this plea amounted to a 10-year sentence. G.Rose would go on to serve 85% of that, amounting to about 7 years. In December of 2023, she was paroled and released back into the general population. I bet you can't guess how that went. Our queen is almost back. It can't come fast enough. She's gonna become #mega famous. Can we get her on Baddies East?
Things Gypsy Rose needs to do when she gets out of prison. 1, make a TikTok account. 2,
Obviously.
be a guest on Hot Ones. 3, start dating Pete Davidson. Oh my God, her mom's rolling in her grave.
Queen, let's crack open that. I know that ain't who I think it is. So many people use words like serve, slay, and mother when there's only one person who has, in fact, served for slaying their mother. I just told my friend that G.Rose's release photo got 3 million likes on Instagram within the first hour, and he said, I'm literally going to kill my mom. Fuck. Will you jump me if I say what I want to say? This whole thing was weird. It's alarming, if not strange, if not kind of depressing. And I'm a very fun person. I love having fun. I even follow G.Rose on Instagram right now. But the fanfare, it's weird. Something about this specific case paired with the internet's reception of it feels reckless. Not because G.Rose is a formerly incarcerated person, not even just because she aided in the death of her mother. It feels weird because it's excessive and dehumanizing, and quite frankly goes against what the internet has been saying about glamorization for years. It feels weird because no one seems to understand why they're doing it. There's a vast number of people in prison for the same reason as G.Rose was. Women who have been abused mentally, physically, sexually, who end up killing their abusers. Some of those women die in prison with no one advocating for them. Others are shown just enough attention to gain clemency, but still never reach stardom. Now, this isn't me wishing celebrity onto others, but it is me asking, what makes G.Rose different? One thing I've noticed is that doing something that society considers wrong is usually okay if you eat a little bit afterwards. Lana Del Rey went on a weird speed run for a while there and then slayed in a photo shoot and everyone forgot. Every man ever in Hollywood did unspeakable crimes and then put out some form of art even if it wasn't very good, and everyone moved on. Transgression, slay, redemption. It's an easy to follow plot. Not only are people speculating about G.Rose's crime and lifestyle, they're also creating digital shrines of her. They tracked her down on her release date, followed her through shoe stores with a camera, stalked her in between grocery aisles. Overnight, G.Rose became the people's princess. We're desperate to know her, desperate to own her, and yet we continuously fail to even understand her. One of the most glaring reasons for this incongruity is how we've mystified G.Rose. She's essentially become a trend instead of a person. At first, it felt as though people were making humorous posts as a way to support her. You know, take a shot for G.Rose and all that. But over the weeks, it's begun to feel a lot like people are having fun at her expense. They're frantic to see what she does next, who she follows on Instagram, what she posts on her social media, what she'll say next in an interview. And no matter what it is, they expect it to be wacky or cringe or controversial so that they can siphon entertainment from it. People are obsessed with making a celebrity. It's like Frankenstein's monster, and they allow these new creations their 15 minutes of fame. Throughout this fame building, so to speak, the new celebrity finds that their pedestal is balanced on a precarious wire. any sudden movement and they go tumbling down. That way, by the time the crowd starts polishing their pitchforks, which they've had tucked away from the start, the anxiety that has been built up makes the hunt even more thrilling for them. And this is not me defending celebrities or billionaires, blah, 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 blah. This is me commenting on a pattern that affects not only the traditional celebrities like, Beyonce or something, but also everyday people like you and me. Anyone can become an internet celebrity. G.Rose is proof of that. The issue with that is that the internet gets bored very quickly. Whereas it was fun to imagine G.Rose going on the Zeus network, which apparently was offered to her for some reason.
I've never met Gypsy Rose a day in my life until this morning. And I said, you killed your mama, how? Oh. That's crazy. Now you might need to be on the next season of Baddies, and I ain't gonna hold you, but...
The gimmick got stale quick, and I mean quickly. People seem to wake up to the fact that G.Rose is a public figure. She was a part of a horrific crime, and she's accessible. 3 things that the internet can and will exploit. From Reddit to her Instagram comments to Twitter to TikTok, the tide has shifted on G.Rose Blanchard. Netizens are revoking their remorse for her, and instead are now accusing her of helping her mom scam people. They imply that she is abusive or manipulative to her husband Ryan, whom she married in prison. And they say that she sacrificed her mom for fame. We are losing the plot, people. People online clamored for her to be famous. They wanted her to do a press run on popular shows and satiate their need for the next Supreme. But when she did those press runs, when she became oversaturated on social media, people became disenchanted. The curtain was essentially pulled back. The charm wore off. You may be thinking that the same group who stan G.Rose in the beginning and those who disparage her now are not the same group of people. That's fair. The internet is vast and there are millions of us. But you'd also be kind of wrong. There are numerous people who make the history of supporting G.Rose clear. They state that while they once followed her, while they once loved her, they have since become irritated by her behavior, so-called new evidence, or even just by the oversaturation of her story in the media. I've also seen someone say that they're unfollowing because her clout dried up. Sure, there are people who never liked G.Rose, who believe that she should never have been released, but there's also a great percentage of people who started out supporting her and then grew to believe that she's evil. The narrative is now focused on G.Rose being a manipulative liar who violently aided in the death of her mother. This theory assumes that G.Rose acted not out of self-defense or as a way to escape abuse, but simply because she is a cold-blooded killer. People have begun to compare old interviews that she's done to newer ones, finding that the details of her story have allegedly since changed. A lot of people are beginning to look deeper into the evidence, which is not new, by the way, and they're realizing that G.Rose may not be the perfect victim they had hoped for. Yet, despite the hours of TikTok footage, despite the thousands of comments and hundreds of think pieces, we still don't understand what it is that we're talking about. I am not Joy Bear. You don't have to tell me that murder is wrong.
There are other ways out. I did it the wrong way.
No. Don't say that.
I did. I did
really.
Something wrong, and I paid my dues for it.
Oh, you mean that part?
Yes, the part of it.
Yeah.
That part of it.
I don't condone taking a person's life, and I also believe that there are some details of this case that, at face value, are impossible to ignore. A major one being the videos G.Rose sent to Nick Godejohn, where she talks about having alter egos that love sexual assault, among other things. In that same vein, there are also times in interviews where G.Rose does something or says something that feels inappropriate for the subject matter. And it's hard to make these things make sense, even if you empathize with her history. When we put people on a pedestal, we often forget that one, they're human and complex, and we also begin to create a cognitive dissonance between the perfect being we're imagining them to be and the flawed person they actually are. Like I said, I am not a true crime channel. I don't want to discuss theories or evidence or, God forbid, opinions. Instead, I want to zoom out to a more topical theme, that of abuse. G.Rose's stardom online and her subsequent downfall reveals to me that no one on the internet understands abuse, nor do they understand abuse survivors. G.Rose was lauded as this strange sort of #girl boss upon her release, and this image fell away once people realized that girly pop is flawed as a person. People say that when something bad happens to you, you're better because of it. But not everyone comes out on the other side of abuse healthy and unaltered and ready to do interviews. Studies show that abuse changes brain structure and chemistry, primarily if you have been abused in childhood. It also affects how you function day to day, socially, emotionally, and behaviorally. I've never been medically abused or sexually abused in the ways G.Rose has, but I have been emotionally and physically abused by my family. When I spoke about this in my last video, I got a comment saying that in spite of this abuse, at least I turned out alright. And I strongly disagree with that. I lost a version of me, both a real version that probably existed before the abuse and a potential version that could have existed had I had been properly loved. The version that was left behind is flawed. Sometimes my brain doesn't feel like it works the same as everyone else's. I zone out and I have nightmares and I feel like I can't even recognize myself in the mirror. I feel fear that is nearly inhuman. I get overstimulated and angry. The stress of this is altering. It makes me feel like a different person. And sometimes I fear that I will be changed forever. I'm not G.Rose and I don't know what she went through. Just because I read about it online and watched her documentaries, I will never know what it feels like to be her. Murder is wrong, duh. But so is being a medical professional and not doing your due diligence. So is being an abusive parent or an enabling relative who doesn't ask enough questions. So is taking a case and treating it as fodder for your entertainment. So I keep stumbling into, I just realized I'm wearing the same exact sweater. Anyways, I keep stumbling into the argument that G.Rose wants to be famous. She wants to be made an icon. She's going on these interviews and having these moments on podcasts instead of doing the work and maintaining a level of privacy. Therefore, because G.Rose arguably wants to be a celebrity, audiences have essentially revoked their own responsibility when it comes to platforming people and making kind of a circus out of real issues. And what I mean by that is people are treating the situation as if they have little to no say in how it happens. Does that make sense? Like people are saying, oh, well, she wants this attention. I have no choice but to give it to her. Ignoring the fact that influencer culture and celebrity culture is all about reciprocity. It's about having a symbiotic, more so parasocial relationship. But regardless, it's two sides. There's an audience and then there's the influencer or celebrity. The influencer or celebrity cannot exist without the audience, and the audience has nothing to idolize or glamorize without the influencer or celebrity. So we have a lot more power than we think we do, and I think it's kind of silly to say, well, G.Rose wants this. She's okay with it. Just because she arguably wants it, just because she's going on these interviews and just because she's doing things that typical influencers do, does that mean you still have to partake in this with her? I'm a firm believer that G.Rose is not an... My light just died. There's a lot more power that you have than you think. You do not have to partake in influencer or celebrity culture. This is kind of why I say that people don't know why they're partaking in this culture. They don't know why they're partaking in this trend of supporting, see also making fun of and making a trend out of G.Rose's abuse. It's like no one is able to really look me in the eye, so to speak, and say, this is why I think making jokes about G.Rose killing her mother is helping her personally. This is why I think making jokes about G.Rose as a person, or making jokes about her abuse, or making a trend out of everything she went through helps her, her family, other abuse survivors witnessing it, anyone on planet Earth. This is why I think it helps. The reason people are unable to do that or explain that is because they don't actually believe it. They don't know why they're doing this, and it's certainly not support. It's a circus. It's something that entertains and that can be taken away at random. There's a certain nuance to be had in this discussion. People know G.Rose's story like the back of their hand, and yet they still can't see how she needs extensive therapy. They can't see that it would take time to unlearn all of the behavior she picked up under her mother's care. They indulge in the gory details of her crime and yet act surprised when a person under her conditions behaves in a way that reflects her conditioning. You're telling me that a woman who was extensively abused all of her life, who was trained to deceive people and never got the help she needed and was instead sent to prison for nearly 10 years, acts like all of those things combined? You're surprised that she doesn't have media training, or that she isn't healed and perfect and all over the place? When would she get the time to work on any of that? Wait, I'm sorry. Do you think prison reforms?
Let's just laugh at him now.
I think G.Rose clearly has some work to do for herself. Prison is not as reformative as it aims to be, and she may need a lot of therapy to unwork all of that. Also, she should probably stop appearing on podcasts. But ultimately, it's not my place to decide any of that. It's up to G.Rose and the people who know her personally, to get her help. Personally, not people on the internet who view this case as entertainment. Not you. So, I've been trying to figure out how to end this video with a profound speech about perfect victims, or a chaotic tangent about how true crime has rotted our brains out and how people on Reddit should probably find religion. I thought about asserting for the nth time how murder is wrong, just to make sure you heard it. I thought about criticizing G.Rose Blanchard again, so you know I mean it. For some reason, posting this video makes me a little nervous, and I haven't been nervous to post a video in a really long time. I simultaneously feel connected and disconnected from this conversation. But the one thing that makes the most sense to me is that we're all wrong. There is no correct answer, no profound beacon of trueness that rules over this conversation. None of us are right because none of us are unbiased. Most of us are desensitized to the horror being presented to us, and all of us are critically, fatally online. No one is right. Not the people making a celebrity out of a very hurt person, not the hurt person who hurt others and then launched an influencer career, and certainly not the internet sleuths who think their opinion is somehow divine and true when really it's just superficial. We've turned something originally complex and, forgive me, nuanced into a circus. The circus is being carried on the back of a derailed train of true crime entertainment and is populated by influencers like Trisha Paytas who want clout off the back of a murder case. Not to mention all the rest of us who are so numbed by sensationalism, numbed by bloodshed, and numbed by the cult of entertainment that we are willing to gain entertainment value from something even if it hurts someone else. Frankly, it's exhausting putting this much work into something and knowing intrinsically that there are still people who won't understand, who will still try to rally the circus because it entertains them. But maybe someone needed to hear that, in which case, I'm glad that I'm not just screaming into the void. What I do know is that this is a topic we can't just throw away out of fear like I so desperately wanted to, and despite the so-called entertainment factor, it's still very much a reflection, about the world we live in and the digital space that we occupy. We need to talk about G.Rose Blanchard and people like her. We need to talk about our relationship with morbid entertainment and our obsession with the public court of opinion. We need to talk about abuse, and we need to talk about these things with care, patience, and less Reddit. Please, for the love of God, get off of Reddit. This is Internet Infamy, and I'm your host, Shanspeare. Good night, and thanks for watching.